Okay, this is going to be a very quick tutorial on how to make a kind of old school BioWare party system where you have a couple AI characters following you and you can switch between them and have the other two continue to follow you. And then you could, maybe have a selected actor of some sort and then you activate it and the AI takes over and runs to that actor and interacts with it and then gives back control to the player. So let's get started. Okay, here we are in a fresh, brand new third-person template. We are going to start by changing the inputs. We are going to first remove the VR. We don't really care about that. And we're going to add one for switching or switch character. And that will be tab. And we'll have one for character interact. And that will be, we'll just set it to E. So the switch character will be, switching between each of the pawns in our party, and then E will be what we press to have the pawn run up and interact with the NPC we're about to make. So, first we should also add a nav mesh that we are going to need for our AI to be able to follow us, as well as for our AI to run our player character or player pawn over to our NPC. Let's make sure this actually covers the entirety of our play area. Hit P to double check. Look for any problems. I don't see any, at least not enough to be worried about at this point. We'll hit P to hide that. Okay. Save our progress so far. So we're going to start by making a new AI controller. AI controller. And we'll call that BP AI controller. We're going to need a new player controller. Call that BP player controller. Okay. If only I could spell. We are going to need a new pawn that we will essentially pass our player controller through it. So we will make a dummy pawn. And because, as you saw in the kind of brief opening, we're going to do some kind of special things with the pawns we spawned, as in changing colors and adding a name and stuff like that. We are going to quickly set up a struct called pawn data that has a color, and this will be a linear color, has a character name that is text, and it will have a spawn offset, which will be a vector. Okay. Now we're going to go into the game mode real quick and set these all to be our default thing. So this is the pawn class. We're going to set up our dummy pawn. And for the player controller, we're going to add our new player controller. Compile and save. Alright, so first things first, we're going to set up our NPC. We're going to call that, we're going to duplicate the third person character, rename it to BP NPC, come in here, and delete everything. We don't need any of it. We're going to add a float called interaction range. And as the name suggests, this will be how close our pawn has to be able to interact with this guy. We'll make that 40. Just kind of close there. And we will need a custom event called interact. And we will give it an input of the third person character reference. I'm going to call that interacting actor. And we'll come back to that in just a second. So next we're going to go into our third person character. And we can let's clean up a little bit here. We don't need the touch inputs. We don't need the VR stuff. All of this can actually stay. All of the, I don't know, mouse turning and jumping and whatnot, we're not going to touch, but we will. We do care about this. And we will get to that in a little bit. The other thing we need to do is go to the defaults, and we need to change not the possess player, but the possess AI. We need to change that to placed or in world or spawned, so that way an AI controller will be spawned and take over control of this pawn whenever we are spawned, or if it is placed in the world, as the name suggests. The AI controller class, we want to set that to our new AI controller, the BP AI controller. And then we are going to create a new variable called let's call it my AI controller. That is of the type BP AI controller reference. And we will expose that. We also need to quickly make a character name just for our flare that we've decided to do, and make that a text. And then we need a body color and expose that and make that a linear color. And actually on the character name and linear color, we want to actually expose on spawn in addition to making it public. So first we're going to go to the construction script, and we're going to create a dynamic material instance from the mesh. So this is how we're going to set up changing the color of each of our pawns. We want to get material. So that will be our element, or our source material rather. And then we will take the output from that, and we will set a vector parameter value. Name will be body color. And if you're wondering where we got that from the material for the mannequin. In here, mannequin body. It is right here, is the name of this parameter that we are going to change. And the value of that color is going to be our body color. Okay. So that gets the construction script out of the way. Now, let's go back and let's do begin play. So we will search for begin play. So what we are going to do is we are going to get AI controller. We're going to get our own AI controller, so get self. And we're going to cast to the AI controller, our BP AI controller. And we're going to save that in our my AI controller variable that we made just a little bit ago. Kind of clean this up a little bit. Okay. So now we're going to actually override a function. So over here in the override dropdown, we're going to override unpossessed. So whoops. Actually, let's delete that so you can see this. So you can see it is the event that is called when the pawn is no longer possessed by a controller. So just to kind of keep all together, well, let's add a comment here just to kind of keep things nice. So unpossessed, we're going to take our AI controller. We're going to check, is this valid? Make sure we have an AI controller saved. And then if it is, we want to have it possess this pawn. So we are going to get self. And there we go. So we'll do, and it's not possessed, it's unpossessed. Okay. So that is actually all we have to do in our character. Well, I take it back. We will come back and we'll do some things here once we kind of see why we need to do it. But for the time being, that's all we're going to do. Let's go back to our NPC right now, and we'll quickly fill out this interact. It's a very, very quick, easy thing. We're going to take this, and we're going to get our character name, get character name, and we're going to print text. Now, of course, you can do something way more exotic than this when you're actually, wanting to, but for our purposes, we just need to see that something's interacting. So we're going to have it print hello name. And we'll make him really excited to see us. And we'll plug in our name. So that is the entirety of our interact function for our NPC. Our NPC is now complete. We can close him. Next, we will need to go into our AI controller. And we will create a begin play. So we can delete that tick. We won't need that. So we will get the player controller for player index 0. We're just in this. We're just assuming it's a single player game. You can get you can get way more fancy if you want, but for all we're doing, we can just do this, and we're going to cast it to our player controller that we have made. Come on. And we're going to cache this. We'll just call it PC or player controller. And then we're going to set timer by event. This will be a looping thing. And, we can set any time we want. We'll just set 1 second. And we will make a custom event called move to player. So what we want to do here is we call AI move to. We're going to get controlled pawn. So this is the pawn controlled by this AI controller. And we're going to get our player controllers controlled pawn. So that's the pawn you are currently playing as. And our acceptance radius, because we don't want things to look too uniform, we will get a random float in range. And we'll go from 200 to 300. So what this will do, once every second, it'll tell, any AI or any pawn that it's connected to move to the player that is controlled by the pawn, or the pawn that is controlled by the player, rather. So that's how we achieve the effect of the pawns, following us. Okay, and that is actually all we have to do for the AI controller as well. The AI controller is done. So now we're getting into some of the meat of this. So we're going to come to the dummy pawn. And we're going to create a function called spawn pawns. Sorry, I should take a step back. So what we're going to do is, on startup, we will spawn a dummy pawn that is controlled by the player controller that we have created. The dummy pawn will then spawn the party of pawns and tell the player controller, hey, I've spawned more pawns. I think you should be able to go possess one of these. And it tells, and it gives it a list of all the pawns it spawned. So that's why we call this a dummy pawn, because it's not actually what you're playing as whenever you play. It just needs to be there on startup to actually handle the exchange. So for the input of the spawn pawns, we are going to have a input called pawn info that will be our pawn data struct, an array, and we will need a local variable called pawns that will be an array of pawn. Okay. So we're going to do a for loop, not a for each loop, a for loop from 0 to the last index of the pawn info. So as you can probably tell, the size of the pawn info array that you pass in will determine how many pawns we decide to spawn. Okay, so we will spawn actor from class, and that goes into the loop body. So our class will be our third person character. We are going to make the transform. For the collision handling override, we always spawn, or try to adjust location, but always spawn. And so here's where our exposed variables are. So we will pull this in, and we will get the copy at the index we are currently on. So we can break this. Actually, let's move this back a little bit. Move these out a little bit. Whoa, probably too far. Okay. So the color will be the body color. The character name will come to the character name. And then, so for spawning, or the location, what we're going to do is we're going to get the actor location of the dummy pawn that we spawned. So this dummy pawn was spawned at our character start volume, or player start. So we're going to take this and we're going to add a vector that is this offset. Let's kind of clean some of this up. And that'll give us our transform, and that should complete everything we need here. And we're going to get pawns, and we're going to add this pawn to our array of pawns that we've spawned. So on the completed, we will, oh, we didn't actually add this. Go back here. Our output, we have an array of pawns called pawns to possess. And that we will just feed our array of pawns. Okay, so now we can come back to our event graph, and we don't need to be an overlap or tick. We will spawn pawns. We want to make array, and for our example, we'll just make 3. And let's do make pawn data. We'll just do Control W a few times to copy this. All right, so let's quickly give them names. All right, and then let's give them some colors. Find a nice orangey color. A lot of puke yellow. There's a decent orange. Oh. Let's find a blue, kind of a light blue, and one of these days I'll remember the alpha, and a green. Okay. Okay, so we've got the names and colors, kind of the flare set up, but the offsets here actually serve an important purpose. So let's look right now and see what we have. Something kind of ugly. Why did that not do what? Oh, I know why. So back in the actual world, we forgot to delete the actual one that's placed in the world. We don't want that pawn. We want to actually have one spawned here. And we can go ahead and place our NPC in the world right now. He's done. So we'll just set him there. You could set him, anywhere navigable. You probably don't want to set him on top of the little box here, but that should do okay. All right, so now this is what I was talking about. So we've kind of spawned with all of the actors in a clump, and so it kind of messes with the camera. So what we want to do is create some offsets. So if you imagine a 3-player party, you generally will have your player character and then your kind of party characters flanking you behind you on either side. So the way you would do that is just add a nice offset to the X to make them behind you, and the Y to make them on either side of you. So we just kind of chose some values there. And this will still look a little weird because we aren't actually possessing them with the player controller yet, but if you look, you can see now the kind of formation that we've spawned them in. And so you could, of course, play with these offsets to move them kind of wherever you want. Okay. So, back in the dummy pawn. The one thing we still have to do is we have to make an event dispatcher called pawns spawned. And this will take an input of a pawn array, exactly like what we've got, and we will call this pawns. So we're going to call this here. And so this is going to be the event that we want to fire to tell the player controller we've spawned some pawns that we think you should be able to possess, and so that the player controller can then come possess. What? Why is it? Oh, the event dispatchers are kind of goofy. Call pawns. There's okay. Now you may get. I'm getting a note here that no value will be returned by reference. This apparently is a known bug that was thought to be fixed in like 4.11, but I am still getting it, but I don't seem to be getting any sort of errors due to this. So at the moment, I'm saying just ignore it. So anyway, so I think that should be it for the dummy pawn. So now we're going to go into the player controller, and we will go to the event graph, delete tick, we don't need tick, and we're going to do a kind of hacky way of getting a target. You would ideally do this a little smarter than this, but for demonstration it works just fine. And we're going to get all actors of the BP NPC class. So that will, in our case, return this guy. So we're going to get the very first one. We expect one. So again, this is a little hacky because technically you would want to, make this a little smarter, but we will just call him move target. Then we will get the get the controlled pawn. So this, at this stage, this will be our dummy pawn, right? Because this is during begin play. We haven't possessed anything else. We've auto-possessed that dummy pawn. And we will cast this to our dummy pawn. And we will bind to pawns spawned. So this is the event that we just made. So off of here, we will say custom event called assume control. And so here's that list of pawns that the dummy pawn spawned. And so actually we want to promote that to a variable called pawns, because we're about to remove ourselves from the dummy pawn. So we want to just get, again, another kind of quick and easy way, but you should probably check that you're indexing into a valid array. But we will actually promote this to a variable called current index. And we will actually call possess on this pawn. So that should possess that very first pawn. So now we should have, yes, we have possessed our very first pawn. Our two AI guys follow us. Okay, so that's good. Okay, and see, again, we're getting the note about reference values. Again, still not too worried about it. And so actually on this, you could also, and probably would be wise, call unbind event. Well, we call all events from pawn spawn because we don't care about our dummy pawn anymore. Our dummy pawn means nothing anymore. Again, same note. Okay. So, now, the last little bit of magic we have here is we want to be able to switch between each of the pawns and have AI controllers take over and relinquish control, as well as maintain the ability to press our interact key and have the AI controller directly control the pawn that the player controller is technically attached to and have it run over to the NPC in our case here because we've hardwired it. So we will get the input for switch character that we set up earlier, and we are going to set the current index. We're going to have to cycle through our list of pawns. So we're going to go to get pawns. We want the last index. We want to get the current index. We want to add one. We're going to move through the list here. And we're going to check, is this, if we add one, are we going to exceed the bounds of our array? We don't want to do that. Select. So if we are exceeding the bounds of the array, then we need to go back to 0. And if not, then we need to just take the +1, the increment, and move on. So we'll take that. And actually, let's get our pawn array. We want to get a copy of, at that index, of the pawn at that index. And we want to possess. We want to possess that pawn. So now we should have the ability to switch between pawns, changes, which guys are following us, and the AI controller is taking over for each of them whenever we change, thanks to us overriding the unpossessed event earlier in the third-person character. Okay, so the final thing is just making them actually run up to our NPC whenever we press our interact key. So interact, character interact. So we want to get controlled pawn, cast this to the third person character. Then we are going to get our move target, check is valid, and then if it is, we want to, out of our third person character, if you remember, we have our AI controller stored that we spawned when we started. We want to pull that my AI controller, get my AI controller, and we want to call move to actor. And we're going to say we're going to do that whenever we have a valid target. So our move target is the goal. And then our acceptance radius is going to be the interaction range from our NPC. And let's move this down a little bit because we're going to need it here in a second. And then from our AI controller, so on like a regular AI move to, you have, it's a latent function, so you actually get exec pins for when the movement is completed and things like that. We don't have that here. So the way we're going to get around doing that is we're going to bind on what is it? Bind on receive move completed. So this is going to fire anytime we complete a movement. Whenever our AI controller thinks our movement is completed. So we want to create a custom event called on AI move completed. So this result enum is going to actually hold, our result, as you can probably expect. So it's going to happen here, but you can see we have a success or blocked, or what you get a number of different things here from your result, and anytime the AI thinks that the move has been either completed or aborted in some way. So let's create that so we can give ourselves a little space. So we want to get controlled pawn again, cast to the third person character, and then we want to drag off here and get the my AI controller. So what we're going to do is, because we have different AI controllers at any given time, we don't want to be binding, or we don't want to maintain our binding on this. So we want to unbind receive move completed, or unbind event from receive move completed. So we're going to add a quick reroute node in here, bring that down. Okay, so now we will switch on our result. Clean this up a little bit. All right, so we only care about a success. We don't. So what we're going to do here is, once we've actually gotten there, we want to get our move target and actually interact with him. But we only want to do it if we actually succeed in getting there. We don't want to do it, if the player decides to run off and do something else, we don't want the interact to fire. So, again, we'll do some cleaning just because this can be a little bit confusing. Okay, so whenever our AI thinks it's completed, we're going to unbind from the completion event, and if we succeeded in making it, we will interact. Okay, so now, well, let's go back. Now we actually could run around, and we still have our ability to switch and do whatever. So now if we hit E, the player, or the pawn, will run to our NPC, which was our move target, and then call interact. But we still have a slight problem. If we hit E, he runs, and I'm trying to now run away. I don't care. I don't want to talk to him anymore. I'm still being forced, the AI still is forcing me to get there. So, how do we rectify this problem? If you'll remember, I said we would come back here. In the move functions, we are actually going to check for any value that is greater than 0, right? So we want to do an absolute value, because you could press forward or backward. Wait, nope, not less than or equal to. We actually want to be greater than. So if you put any input, or if the player puts any input, we want to get the AI controller and tell it stop movement. It means we don't care about whatever the AI controller is doing. The player making an input should override the AI. And if it's false, we come in just straight into the add movement. So that way, if we get any input, it'll override. So now we just take all of this and we will copy it down here and do the exact same thing. And do a little bit of cleaning, just so we don't have too much spaghetti going on here. Okay, so now we should be done. We have our AI guys follow us. We can switch between them and have the other two continue to follow us. And then we can be running and hit E, and we will run and interact. And you can see in the corner, our character name changes based on which character we are. And so we can come over here, and then I have that guy selected. He tries to run there, and I say, oh, I don't want to do that. And I can run, and the AI controller immediately gives up, and the player controller takes over again. All right, so I think that's it, actually. So you should now have the ability to, remake Knights of the Republic or Dragon Age or any of those things. All right, thank you for watching.